Welcome to the online version of Introduction to Agricultural Emergency Management, produced by the National Agricultural Biosecurity Center at Kansas State University. Depending on your background and skill set coming into your position within agricultural emergency management, some aspects of this course may be review for you. Nonetheless, it is our hope that everyone will be able to learn and apply the curriculum into their respective role within agricultural emergency preparedness. This slide provides an outline of the course, which is broken into 4 sections. Congratulations on your new job. Now that you have been hired to execute agriculture emergency management duties within your state, what traits or skills will help you to be successful? Likely you exhibited strength in several of these areas during your application process, but no individual will be perfect in all these areas. As you read through the list, consider which traits or skills you already excel in and which you can focus on developing further in order to be more effective in your new position. The rest of Section 1 will focus on introducing the basic components of emergency management, particularly as they relate to animal agriculture. In 1970, devastating wildfires struck California that resulted in 16 deaths, 700 destroyed structures, and over 500,000 acres burned. Differences in terminology, response structure, and incident objectives between response agencies led to poor coordination in response activities at all levels. Because of the disjointed response, in 1971, Congress appropriated $900,000 to the U.S. Forest Service to develop a system that would significantly improve the capabilities of wildfire protection agencies to effectively coordinate multi-agency emergency response. This effort marked the beginning of contemporary incident management policies, many of which have been established following the tragic events of September 11, 2001. Continue through the next set of slides for a brief history and explanation of many of these emergency management policies relevant to the agricultural industry. The Incident Command System, known simply as ICS, was developed in the 1970s by the U.S. Forest Service as a result of the poor coordination and response activities to the devastating wildfires in California. Originally called Field Command Operations System, ICS was designed to field a system which would provide uniform terminology, procedures, and incident organization structure required to ensure effective, coordinated action when 2 or more agencies are involved in a combined effort. ICS went on to be adopted by all the original development partner agencies, fire, hazardous materials, or HAZMAT, and search and rescue responders during the 1980s and 90s. The use of ICS as a scalable way to manage any type of incident, including planned events, has now been tested and proven for over 30 years across all sectors of emergency response. The illustration on this slide provides an example of what an ICS structure may look like. Following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, the newly formed Department of Homeland Security, hereon referred to as DHS, identified the need for a standardized and consistent incident management system among all U.S. first responders. Released in February 2003, Homeland Security Presidential Directive 5, commonly referred to as HSPD 5, aims to enhance the ability of the United States to manage domestic incidents by establishing a single, comprehensive National Incident Management System, or NIMS. The first version of NIMS was subsequently issued in March of 2004. HSPD 5 also charges the Secretary of DHS to administer a National Response Plan, or NRP, which shall integrate federal government domestic prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery plans into one all-discipline, all-hazards plan. The NRP was renamed to the National Response Framework, or NRF, in order to better align the document with its intent and to encourage the continued development and refinement of detailed, robust all-hazards emergency operations plans. In essence, the NRF provides insight into how the community cooperates and how response efforts relate to other aspects of national preparedness. Homeland Security Presidential Directive No. 9 was released in January 2004. It tasks the development of a national policy to defend the agriculture and food system against terrorist attacks, major disasters, and other emergencies. This has been the impetus behind projects such as the development of the Food Emergency Response Plan, or FERP, template and the Livestock Emergency Response Plan, or LERP, toolkit. More information on resources such as these will be provided in the course conclusion. Most recently, on June 30th, 2017, President Trump signed the Securing Our Agriculture and Food Act into law. This bill amends the Homeland Security Act of 2002 by tasking the Assistant Secretary for Health Affairs for DHS to lead the government's efforts in defending the nation's food, agriculture, and veterinary systems against terrorism and high-consequence events. The Act directs the oversight of DHS's responsibilities regarding HSPD 9, DHS activities and policy initiatives regarding veterinary public health, food defense, and agricultural security, and coordination with other federal partners. Traditional emergency responders approach incidents with the concept that all disasters begin and end locally. This has been echoed by DHS literature and FEMA leadership in recent years. While true for most emergencies, this phrase is not consistent with how many animal health emergencies are handled. For instance, in the case of a foreign animal disease, henceforth referred to as an FAD, or highly contagious disease, subsequently referred to as an HCD outbreak, it is true that a local producer or veterinarian is the first to notice that an animal or group of animals is ill. In this sense, the incident does begin locally. However, after the identification of a sick animal and suspicion of an FAD or HCD, state and federal animal health officials will immediately become involved as they hold the authority for responding to livestock diseases. A foreign animal disease diagnostician, or FADD, will likely place the premises under quarantine and initiate diagnostic testing. With the interests of other producers, the public, and domestic and international markets in mind, officials may begin to issue movement restrictions in order to contain the disease as quickly as possible. Consequently, these events are typically handled in a top-down approach. Because the nature of the incident and potential for progressive damage from an FAD, HCD differ drastically from a tornado, blizzard, or other natural disaster, the situations are handled quite differently. That being said, natural disasters involving animals are managed in a more traditional manner. It is therefore important to understand the distinction between types of incidents and the implications for authorities involved and funds available in the response efforts. The Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, commonly referred to simply as the Stafford Act, was enacted in 1988, amending the Disaster Relief Act of 1974. It consists of 7 titles that establish the process for declaring disasters, determining the appropriate level of response, and allocating the costs among federal, state, and local governments. Traditional emergency management relies on declarations via the Stafford Act for federal assistance for major disasters or emergencies. Its application to all hazard events is complicated and typically limited in scope, and it does not apply to disease events. Funding mechanisms for FAD HCD response will vary from state to state. Some states may have limited emergency funding, particularly for all hazard response. Most state animal health departments or departments of agriculture operate on tight budgets to perform their day-to-day responsibilities, and thus look to state funding in the case of an emergency. This funding may be under the State Emergency Management Agency's control and may only be available to local and state agencies if approved by the governor, perhaps only after a governor's emergency declaration. Should additional funding be necessary, the Department of Agriculture or Emergency Management Agency may need to request funding from the state legislators, which can take time, effort, and persuasion. Some funding is available for a state responding to an FAD-HCD from USDA through cooperative agreements, though the state needs to provide evidence of their needs through careful planning and expectations. Alternatively, the Secretary of Agriculture may make a USDA secretarial disaster designation at the request of a designated state or tribal entity. In the event of an FAD-HCD outbreak within the United States, a USDA secretarial designation will trigger a larger scope of resources to become available for response activities. Smaller requests generally are fulfilled through appropriated funds, while requests greater than $1 million are usually a Commodity Credit Corporation or CCC request. In the 2014-2015 highly pathogenic avian influenza or HPAI outbreak, the Secretary of Agriculture requested over $900 million in CCC funds without any type of emergency declaration. This concludes Section 1 of the Introduction to Agricultural Emergency Management Training. We thank you for your interest in this course. Please continue to Section 2 for an introduction to the beef, dairy, and swine industries in the U.S.